Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my Star Trek Standalone book ranking. I recently on the channel did a Star Trek book series ranking. I try to update every year and a half, every 2 years, and I also wanted to update my Star Trek Standalone ranking. There were a few new ones, a few ones that fell off the list, things like that, and I'm really excited to talk about all of them. To start with, I'm going to talk about five that just missed the list, my honorable mentions. These are, really good books. Some of them came out quite recently, and they really are excellent additions to the Star Trek literature. It's just that they just couldn't make it onto the top 10. So real quickly, these honorable mentions include Die Standing by John Jackson Miller, which is one of the ones that used to be on the list, but it got knocked lower a little bit because there's some new excellent books that I read. And this is basically like a spy thriller type book. It's about Emperor Georgiou from Discovery, and I'm not a big Discovery TV show fan, but oh boy, this book was so good, and it's a very, very entertaining story. The next honorable mention on my list is one of the newest. It's actually the newest release that's out as of now, and that is Star Trek Lost to Eternity by Greg Cox. This was way better than it deserved to be. The story revolving the murder mystery podcasts about Gillian Taylor alone was worth the book. That storyline was amazing. And then the other two storylines were entertaining too, and they all converge in a way, and it's like, oh my goodness, that's so cool, so brilliant. I had such a fun reading this, but particularly the murder mystery stuff in this book is just so good. And Greg Cox just did an amazing job. And if you like the movie era for TOS, and you specifically like The Voyage Home, I think you will really feel a lot of connection to this book. And Voyage Home is my favorite of the Star Trek movies. Next, another new release that was just so good it had to make the list was Pliable Truths. That also came out this year. This is by Dayton Ward. This is a next generation book that's also kind of a DS9 book. It's basically about once the Federation has just taken control of the station. I mean, they just are in negotiations to take DS9 or Terek Nor from the Cardassians over Bajor. And the Picard and the Enterprise crew is sent to start working on the station. And there's a mystery that happens on the station. And it really gets to why DS9 and The Next Generation are two of the most popular Star Trek series. And it was just a blast to read and had quite a twist ending that I really enjoyed. So that was also an honorable mention. My next honorable mention, again, used to be on the list, got knocked down from some new ones, and that is Revenant by Alex White. This is a Deep Space Nine story that is just so good. It really gets not only Dax, but the whole the symbiote and the whole Trill society makes it really interesting. The whole concept of the Trills is just so fascinating in this book, and there's a lot of interesting themes that are explored in this book as well. And all the previous Daxes are there. This one focuses on Jadzia during the middle of the show's run, obviously, but. If you like the Dax storyline and the whole DS9 type themes that are in that show, I think you'll really enjoy this one. My last honorable mention is Picard Rogue Elements, which is just one of the most fun books in the entire Star Trek mythos. It's basically Han Solo in Star Trek. And Cristobal Rios ends up getting control of, I was going to say the La Sirena, but that would be redundant. He gets control of La Sirena. And La Book was very good for it. And there's some, the characters from a certain TOS episode show up, and it's so funny seeing them interact in like the Picard era. And again, I didn't like the first 2 seasons of Picard, but I thought this book was an excellent addition. So those are the honorable mentions. Let's get to the actual top 10 with number 10, Before Dishonor by Peter David. This is such a good book. This is really the big epic Borg battles that you're promised in Destiny, but you don't really get in Destiny. This is basically that, a precursor to that. Every author was basically throwing in the Borg, having the Borg show up a lot, and then of course, David Mack did the big epic finale with the Borg. But this book, it has a lot of Seven of Nine in it. It has a lot of Janeway in it, a lot of the Next Generation cast, which is why it's a Next Generation title. But this book shook up a lot of the Star Trek universe and was just such an epic read. This is what I feel like the movies that dealt with the Borg should have done. I love the First Contact, but First Contact could have been way better if they'd handled the Borg differently. Truly made it the big epic army of cubes and epic battles and doing cool stuff. The cool stuff with the sun in this book is just really cool. So I love that. So that's my number 10. That's one that's not going to stay up. My number 9 is a much smaller scale book, and that is DS9's The Missing. This is a very short book by Una McCormick. I believe I read this in like 24 hours. From when I started it to when I finished it was really like less than a day. It was really fast because this book is just so entertaining. Una McCormick gets the DS9 show really well. This is with the new DS9 in this book, and it's just a lot of, even though DS9 is one of my least favorite Star Trek series, for some reason the books just really resonate with me. And I don't know whether it's the authors involved or whether it's the characters and storyline. Crusher is involved in this book. She's just headed over to DS9 at this point. This book takes place at basically the exact same time that another book, Takedown, takes place, which we'll also see on the list. And this book is just, it's an interesting mystery because it is both small and large scale, and the group of aliens, the refugees, I guess you would call them, that come and like swarm DS9 in this book are also really fascinating. And I just had a blast reading this one. So that's my number 9. My number 8 is Dayton Ward's From History's Shadow. This is such an interesting book because it has almost no ties to Star Trek. The Star Trek TOS cast is in the beginning of the book, and they're a little bit in the end of the book, and there's hints to them sprinkled throughout. But really, it is like a book set in like the 1940s about government agents who are trying to investigate UFO sightings. And so there's a lot of terminology that comes from like the 40s and the 50s that really feels retro, and there's kind of that UFO storyline, Area 51, conspiracy theories stuff going on. It just feels like a throwback book. And this book was nominated for a Media Tie-In Award for the for speculative fiction novel for the Scribe Awards, and it was an amazing book. And any other year, I would have said this book should have won the Scribe Award. And it lost to Kenobi, which is the best book of media tie-in fiction, in my opinion. So, of course, it makes sense that it lost that year. But it's an amazing book, and it's I think, Dayton Ward's best book so far. I also have at number 7 another really short, sweet Star Trek DS9 book titled Force in Motion. And most of this book doesn't even take place on DS9. It takes place on a much smaller science station. And you're not even following main characters in this book. You're following really side characters. You're following, why can't I remember his name? O'Brien, thank you. O'Brien is one of the characters in this. I knew it was the Irish guy, the Union guy. Anyway, you follow O'Brien in this book and Nog in this book, and the two of them are sent to this research station because they're visiting a friend of his, and it ends up having a lot of problems at the station, and their job is to fix the problems and also find out why they're happening. And first of all, I love this gorgeous cover by by Doug Drexler and Ali Rees. Oh, this is a gorgeous cover. And I really enjoyed this one, so that's why it's my number 7. My number 6, and we're getting into some of the top tier Star Trek books of all time. Top tier of all time. My number 6 is the novel Full Circle by Kirsten Beyer. Now this is kind of cheating because this is also one of the books on the series. I didn't include any books on my top 10 series ranked except this one because this is a standalone that also serves as the start of an arc of stories for the Full Circle fleet. And Basically, this book is 2 books combined, which is why it's the longest book on this list. It's about 550 pages long. It's enormous for a Star Trek book. For a fantasy book, that'd be average or even below average. But for a Star Trek book, this is enormous. And it's basically 2 books. The first book is basically a fun adventure in the Alpha Quadrant that happens, set before the events of Destiny, which is the big epic Star Trek battle against the Borg that happens in the books. And then the second half of the book is set after Destiny and is a reaction to Destiny and is just this epic stuff with Janeway's going on, stuff with Chakotay and all the rest of the characters. They're all reacting to everything that happened in that. You have Admiral Paris, who's going through a lot in this book. You have them trying to figure out what to do with Voyager. And when you find out what full circle means in this book, it is absolutely brilliant. I thought that the direction that they took Voyager in the books was the absolute correct direction to take them. And it might have felt some people to the cheap what they did, but I thought it was brilliant, and I loved this book. Of all the Star Trek Voyager books, particularly the ones by Kirsten Beyer, this is one of the ones that I have the most fond memories of. This one, and then the Homecoming books by Christy Golden. These 2 just really connected with me. That's why it's my number 6. My number 5 is a very different type of. A lot of these are very different, which is why I liked them. But my number 5 is Kahless by Michael Jan Freeman. It was originally a hardcover that they also released in mass market paperback, and I much prefer the paperback cover. But this is a fantasy book, basically, that also is a Star Trek book. It's basically treats the Klingon culture and Kronos as if it was its own. You're reading a fantasy book, and your epic hero is Kahless, the original Kahless. And then this book also has a storyline with Kahless the clone. So you have Kahless the Unforgettable and Kahless the clone. And so the book's set in 2 different timelines, and Kahless the clone is the Emperor, and he's dealing with all these potential people that want to kill him, and they're trying to figure out a mystery. And so it's kind of traditional Star Trek thriller storyline. The other half of the book is the epic fantasy showing Kahless the Unforgettable come up with his ideas, with him leading his soldiers in battle, with him having a relationship with another Klingon. And it is an absolutely great example of how to tell like a fantasy story in a sci-fi universe or a fantasy story in a tie-in franchise. It blends genres. It was really original. I love this book, so that's why it's my number 5. My top 4, I believe, are the exact same top 4, just 3 of them are in different orders than the last ranking. My number 4 is The Antares Maelstrom by Greg Cox. This book is basically a gold rush book set in Star Trek, but it absolutely feels like a Star Trek book at the same time, but it also feels unique because the gold rush. The Antares Maelstrom just has like a one-off line in the Wrath of Khan, but it is just such an interesting book. The Scotty gets a lot of development in this book I really liked, as does Sulu. Sulu gets a lot to do in this book, and just as just a plain old TOS adventure. This is my favorite TOS adventure, not including the movies, especially in the books. So I really loved The Antares Maelstrom by Greg Cox. And also another gorgeous cover, this one by Shutterstock and Getty Images. What? No, that can't be right. Cover design by Alan Dingman. There we go. Alan Dingman worked on this. But yeah, I really liked that. I was reading the wrong thing. Let's see. My number 3 is a book that, by all accounts, should not have worked for me, and it absolutely does. And that is Star Trek Picard, The Last Best Hope. This is by Una McCormick. This is a prequel book to the Picard series. And as I mentioned earlier, I was not a fan of the Picard series, the first 2 seasons. The 3rd season of Picard is my favorite season of Star Trek ever. And my favorite episodes are in it, my favorite moments, everything I love about Picard Season 3 is amazing. But the first 2 seasons I didn't care for at all. I hated them, actually, really. I don't use that term often. But this book makes me appreciate the first 2 seasons, especially the first season, a lot more. It's basically the story of how Picard left the Enterprise to go and try to solve the Romulan crisis. They figured out the Romulan sun is going to explode and destroy everything, so they're basically going to go supernova, I should say. And so they're working on trying to relocate all the Romulan people. And so Picard takes center stage on this, and you're seeing the whole process of trying to rebuild and the whole process of trying to set the stage, and then him failing with everything. And also, it's got Geordi and his stuff with the synths and what happens on the Mars base and stuff. And had I read this book, if this book had, I didn't read this book till after I'd watched season 1, but if I had read this book before season 1 had come out, I think I would have enjoyed season 1 a lot more, because this book does a lot of heavy lifting to make season 1 better. And so this is an amazing book here. My number 3. My number 2 is tailor-made for my likes, and that is Keith DeCandido's Articles of the Federation. It's a follow-up to the A Time 2 series with all the epic political stuff going on. We have Nanyeta Bako, also known as Nan Bako, who is now the president of the Federation, and this is about her taking power, this is about all of her staff. The pitch for this book, and it's not just coming from me, the authors mentioned this too, is West Wing and Star Trek, because this came out in, I think, like 2004 or 2005. It came out in 2005, June 2005. The West Wing was airing at this point. It had finished season 5 and it was about to do season 6, I think. Or maybe it was 6 and 6 and they were about to do season 7. Regardless, The West Wing was super popular at this point. Super big, large, and so this is basically The West Wing in Star Trek, and The West Wing is my favorite TV show of all time. And as I was reading this, I was like, oh, he got this idea from The West Wing, and oh, he got this idea from this, and oh, he got this idea from this, and it's just such a great political storyline. There's nothing like offensive. Like if you were a conservative or a super hardcore conservative or super hardcore liberal, you can read this political storyline and not be offended by any of it because it's just seeing what happens with government. And I just thought it was such a fascinating read, such a bold stroke. I do not like the cover at all for it. I think that this communicates what the story is about, kind of, but it also really is not like welcoming for Star Trek fans. So it wasn't as successful as it should have been because it's an amazing book. So this is my number 2, and it's fantastic. I'm so glad I read this. But my number 1 is the first Star Trek book I ever read, and nothing's unseen in this thing because it's brilliant. I started the first standalone book and the first Star Trek trilogy I ever read are my favorite standalone and my favorite trilogy. And you could say, well, it's just because it's the first and you have nostalgia for them. Well, I went back and reread them a couple years ago, and they're still that good. And they're by the same author. And for those of you who have been around the channel forever, you probably know this answer. And that is Takedown by John Jackson Miller. This is a kind of Hunt for October in space book where Picard is chasing Riker, who's doing something that we don't know, and we don't understand why he's doing it, and Riker is causing all this mayhem, and this is a brilliant book. It reads so fast. It's such an exciting thriller. John Jackson Miller gets the characters. He gets the storylines of Star Trek. He also does a good job of making a book that you could just jump right into knowing nothing about the Star Trek universe. It's just that good. John Jackson Miller is just, everything he does is amazing. And the trilogy I was referencing is the series he got after writing this, which was the Prey trilogy, which is my favorite Star Trek story of all time. But the Prey trilogy is just chef's kiss, amazing. And Takedown is his best standalone in Star Trek. And he's written some other darn good Star Trek books, but this is so good. So just everything about this. And there is a species that shows up, and I was like, oh, that's so cool, because I had actually seen that episode of The Next Generation that they pop up in. So if you've read this, you'll probably understand why I love it so much. Because, and again, Hunt for October is one of my top favorite novels of all time, and this book is very similar. So those are my top 10 plus 5 honorable mentions, my top Star Trek books ranked. If you have a list of favorite Star Trek books ranked, let me know your list in the comments section down below. Most of my stuff is recent stuff. I think the oldest thing I have is Before Dishonor, which was from 2007. So, Kalis was from the 90s. Kalis was from like 94. So most of my stuff is from modern day Star Trek, but I really love reading Star Trek books. I've read about 150, which is nowhere near all of them. I've read like a fifth of all the Star Trek books. But I'm enjoying going through them. So if you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what your top 10 is. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.